Now, let's bring in journalist Sara James, who's been watching Joe Biden speak. Sara James, just what did you make of the comments that Joe Biden made and also the tone of how he spoke?
Well, Miriam, I think that the tone was one that was steady. It was clear, it was forceful and firm, but it also was a warm tone. It was one where he said that he was going to work on behalf of everyone who had voted. But I would say most of all, it was confident. He used the words, "I will win Pennsylvania." And that's significant because, of course, Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes, and that state in and of itself is enough to tip any candidate into the winning column. So in essence, he was saying there, I will become president. But let's have a listen to what he had to say earlier, just a short time ago.
We don't have a final declaration of victory yet, but the numbers tell us it's clear, tell us a clear and convincing story. We're going to win this race. Just look at what has happened since yesterday. 24 hours. We were behind in Georgia. Now we're ahead, and we're going to win that state. 24 hours ago, we were behind in Pennsylvania, and we are going to win Pennsylvania. And now we're ahead, but we're winning in Arizona, we're winning in Nevada, and in fact, our lead just doubled in Nevada. We're on track to over 300 electoral votes, electoral college votes. And look at the national numbers. We're going to win this race with a clear majority of the nation behind us.
Joe Biden speaking there a short time ago in Wilmington, Delaware, all but declaring victory. Sara James, what did you make of the fact that he went on to say that he's already preparing for government and the first subject he went to was coronavirus?
Well, that has, of course, Joe, been his main campaign issue. He has spoken for months now about how the president has not done a good job on that and has shown poor leadership. And that really has been an essential part of this. So I think that's one of the aspects that he wanted to raise. But, you know, we should point out that this is how transitions work. And we don't have a transition yet because we don't formally have a president-elect. But always what happens is the second someone learns that they are going to become president, and really not until a second before, they start planning, they start pulling together the briefing books, they start assembling the team. Because one part of the U.S. system is that they have until January 20th. That's how it works in the Constitution, and that gives them a several-month lead-up. So if you compare that, for example, to the Australian system, where you have shadow ministers, and that's the way they prepare, in the United States, you don't have that. So you have this narrow window of several months where you can get ready to take over the levers of power. Now, of course, Joe Biden already understands that pretty well because, of course, he was vice president under President Obama. But nevertheless, he was sending a message there. And I should point out one other thing. Because the president has spoken in the last 24 hours and those comments were not well received and several of the networks cut away from what he said, saying these are untrue comments, I think this was also an attempt by former Vice President Biden to put himself on the record and to keep part of that conversation as the process of counting the votes continues to unfold.
And so how will Joe Biden's management of just going to coronavirus, because that's the first thing he brought up, and just looking towards policy now because it seems all but certain that he will be president, how will, for example, management of coronavirus in the US change under the Biden leadership?
Well, he hasn't laid out specific examples yet, but one of the things that he has spoken about in the past is masks. I think that the United States, this came up earlier in the broadcast, but the United States simply does not have the buy-in on wearing masks that we have seen to be so effective here in Australia. So whether or not that's going to be mandatory or whether it's going to be mandatory if you're on a flight, for example, well, those will be the things that will be determined. But he has certainly indicated that it will be a much stronger policy on that. But there's another piece to this. There are people hurting in the United States. So many people have lost jobs. And although we saw an uptick recently, we still have millions of people who are unemployed. And so I think one of the first issues that you will see related to this and to pandemic relief is an attempt to get a piece of legislation through Congress, if it hasn't already happened, to make sure that those who are hurting can really handle some of the tougher measures that might go into play.
And what about the Biden approach to the economy? One of Donald Trump's biggest achievements through his period was tax reform. How will the approach to the economy and tax change under Joe Biden?
Well, that has definitely been an area where Joe Biden has signaled that he would not have the same approach, and that companies and that individuals who make above a certain level could expect that there might be higher taxes. So, again, these things involve Congress. It's not a situation where the president, who's in the executive chair, can handle all of that. They've got to work with Congress. And we know that Joe Biden at this moment is sitting with a situation where Congress is divided. We have a couple of very interesting Senate races in Georgia that everyone is paying close attention to, because if Joe Biden does indeed become president, he is going to want a majority, or it's going to be harder for him to get things done. So the Senate races that are going to go to a runoff in Georgia, well, everybody's got Georgia on their mind, Joe and Miriam. They really do.
That's for sure. So we're looking already in Georgia at two Senate runoffs with Republican incumbent David Perdue against Democratic challenger John Ossoff, and Republican Kelly Loeffler against Democrat Raphael Warnock. So a lot shaping up there. But of course, let's go back to Joe Biden, because he spoke so confidently, saying that he would win Georgia. So flipping that state after 28 years. The contest in Georgia has played out really interestingly, and of course there's been a lot developing on the ground in Georgia, particularly with Stacey Abrams. Just how significant do you think all of those factors have come into play there?
Oh my gosh, Miriam, they have been so significant. I mean, you have to remember that just a couple of months ago, maybe about 6 months ago, the Democrats thought, no way, we're never going to get Georgia. They had to be convinced. And they were convinced by Stacey Abrams, who had run for governor against Kemp there, and also by Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is the mayor of Atlanta. Now, when I say that Stacey Abrams had actually created a roadmap for winning the state, I mean, literally, there was a book. And she said, this is how we're going to get it done. She has been incredibly gracious in the last 24 hours in saying that she herself got so much help from an army of volunteers who went out and really sought to register thousands of new voters. And that was crucial. I mean, we're seeing that this is a race. When last I checked, there were about 4,000 votes separating Joe Biden from Donald Trump, with Biden being in the lead. And Stacey Abrams can take a lot of credit. You could say that in this particular year, success has many mothers. There have been some strong women involved. I just listed two in Georgia. You could also go to Cindy McCain out in Arizona. But you would be absolutely remiss if you didn't talk about the enormous support from Black and Latino communities, Native Americans in Arizona as well. The United States is complex. There are a lot of breakdowns among these in terms of who supports whom. But certainly, if I can use Joe Biden got a lot of help from his friends. Let's put it that way. And the Democrats had to have that coalition to push things to where they sit tonight, which is that they're ahead in several of these swing states, and they are just waiting for it to be close enough that there's enough votes that people will say, that's it, he's won.
And mail-in ballots have been critical in this election. Donald Trump is crying fraud because he just can't understand how it could be possible that he could see his lead disappear. So is it the case that the Democrats have just been a lot more successful, the Democrat machine has been a lot more successful at getting people to vote through that mechanism?
Well, yes. I mean, it was really two very different strategies. As you remember, President Trump really denigrated the whole prospect of voting by mail and talked about problems with it. So a lot of Republicans who listen closely to what the president has to say said that, forget it, we're not going to vote that way. We're actually going to go and vote in person. Democrats, by and large, the polls tell us, were much more concerned about the pandemic, took it much more seriously in that way, and therefore they voted by mail in greater numbers. And so what happened was, I mean, let's be clear, these are all legal ballots. You had the opportunity in many states to vote in either way. And, that's how it worked. So that's how they rolled out. Joe, if I could say one more thing, I've been really struck in this election because I covered the election in 2000, that dramatic election where it looked like it was going to be President Gore. And then, of course, we had Florida, and it became President Bush with the Supreme Court. And everybody learned so much from that. So the states really tried to get their act together in these intervening months. They knew that there was going to be the potential of a challenge. And you had election officials giving interviews, trying to harden up their processes. They actually installed cameras in a lot of places, including Georgia and Pennsylvania, so that quite literally you could watch the process unfold. A reporter friend of mine in North Carolina said it's about as exciting as watching paint dry. But the reality...
Yeah, we just heard a Pennsylvania official saying that very thing as he gave an update. There are cameras everywhere.
Yeah, so kind of boring television. I mean, one step of C-SPAN, but, that's democracy, isn't it? So if there's one piece of this that, as an Australian, as an American, I'm a dual citizen, voting, it's fundamental to both of our countries. It's what it means to be a democracy. And election officials have taken it seriously. They've had people from Republican and Democratic Party there to monitor in all these election places. And it is not over, but we've been watching it unfold.
Yeah. So, Sara James, clearly all steps being taken there to ensure that the vote stands. But noting as well in Joe Biden's statement, he was saying that he would be a president for all Americans. He would have a duty of care for all. Given how polarised things have been and the fact that there hasn't been, as big a swing in some of those states as well as we were expecting, do you think that people across America will be receptive to Joe Biden once he becomes officially the president?
I think that there would be widespread agreement across the United States that that is going to be one of the single greatest challenges of this administration, that ability to try to knit America back together again. Because one of the reasons I always thought this election would be close is because the nation is so polarized. And it really is, you're for him or you're against him in terms of the president of the United States. So if Joe Biden is to become the next president of the United States, he is going to have a tall order to reach out to people across both all parties. I mean, I say two parties, but it's much broader than that. He has, however, made it very clear in his statements over the last couple of days that it isn't red states or blue states, it's the United States, that he would work as hard for the people who voted against him as those who voted for him. Those are words we will watch how they play out if he does become president. But certainly he is sending very clear signals. And I would point out that that is in striking contrast to the president of the United States, who has made pointed remarks about Democrat governors and has signaled out certain cities that he seems not to like, and has been far more polarizing and divisive. So there have been 4 years of that, and sort of you're on the Trump team or you're not. And Biden has signaled that that would not be how he plans to run his administration.
And Sara, before we let you go, just talking about contrast, what did you make of the fact that Kamala Harris was by Joe Biden's side compared to Donald Trump in the previous 24 hours and no Mike Pence to be seen?
Well, that second one, no Mike Pence to be seen, is very interesting indeed, because you do wonder about the conversations there. But in terms of Joe Biden having Kamala Harris by his side, that is in many ways symbolic. She is the first person of color to be on a major party ticket. So if he were to win the White House, she as vice president would be the first person of color in the United States as the vice president of the United States. He has always been someone who has been collegial. When he was Obama's vice president, he said, I want to be the last person you speak to before you make a decision. And so for him to bring Kamala Harris there up on stage with him is a visual representation of how he, as someone who is vice president himself, sees the office of vice president as not something that's immaterial, but as something that's fundamentally important. And I would add, Joe, that with a president, if he becomes president, who is of the age that he is, it's also symbolic to say this person could take over in case. And by the way, that's just the role of vice president. One last thing, that person, vice president, no matter who they are, is a tiebreaker in the Senate.
All right, a lot of great insights there. It's been wonderful to have you with us on ABC News, Sarah James.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.